Hello, everyone. This is Yoli Chisholm, and this is the show where I talk about everything marketing, past and present, and tools, tactics, and technologies that I am obsessed with. And sometimes it's marketing news. And this week, it's the news from Google. Well, they provided more details on them stopping support for third-party cookies. Oh boy, that I feel is going to have a lot of impact. That is going to reverberate all across the ad tech and martech industry. So I'm trying to find out, what do I need to do to prepare for it? What are you doing? Let's get into it. So everybody, on my website, I have a full blog post where I really try to unpack and give you a sense of what the impact of Google ending support for third-party cookies will be to you as a brand and for you as an advertiser, and really for the whole ad tech and martech ecosystem. So Google has provided more details on an initiative that they're calling the Privacy Sandbox. And they say that the goals of this initiative are to make browsing on the web more secure and enhance privacy. But what does that mean? So one of the things that will be impacted is that they will be phasing out in 2 years support for third-party cookies. They make the case that third-party cookies, which were originally intended to enhance advertising and provide more relevant ads to the buyer, they say that that really essentially is being abused today, and our cookies are being used far beyond the original intent. And so in 2 years, no more third-party cookies, no more third-party tracking. What does that mean for you as a brand? Well, first, let's just unpack what cookies are and how cookies work for the rest of you who may not know. So cookies were invented in 1994 by a Netscape programmer called Lou Montulli, who essentially was tasked with figuring out how they could save server space. And so he came up with a way to store the data on the user's computer instead of their own servers. And that data, so which is the cookie is essentially a unique identifier, a number, just a small piece of data that gets stored on your computer the first time you visit a website. And so what it allows that website owner to do, or that brand to do, is to create a much more personalized experience. It allows them to understand what you put in your shopping cart, for example, what else you've looked at, and maybe suggest some other things. It also stores useful information like your login preferences, and so that you can have a much more personalized and convenient experience every time you visit the site thereafter. So it stores what is essentially a session ID or a session token, but it's just a unique number, and that is essentially what the cookie is. It lives on your computer. So what I just described to you are examples of how first-party cookies work. And first-party cookies are associated with a single domain, that particular website, and they're initiated by the first time you visit that website, and they enable functionality and personalization on that particular website. Now, the difference between third-party cookies is that third-party cookies are dropped, for example, when you visit a publisher and that publisher has ads that are surfaced on that web page, and the ad platform or ad technology or advertiser drops a cookie, and essentially they track what you buy. They are able to connect several cookies and build an anonymous profile of your interests and your affinities. And these are actually put in what tends to be called audience segments. And audience segments tend to be in a combination of cookies that have been dropped on your computer or browser based on your browsing behavior, purchase behavior, things you have liked, sites you go to essentially ends up building an anonymous profile of your behavior. And advertisers are able to use that data to refine their targeting. And from a buyer's perspective or from a consumer's perspective, it ensures that you are seeing ads that are more relevant to the things that you are interested in. And so if you have had the feeling that you are essentially being tracked, no, it's essentially this technology that over time, in combination with other technology that ad tech platforms have developed, that allows them to provide a much more personalized experience, a much more intelligent experience. Now, these third-party cookies, these cookies can be actually combined with first-party cookie data to even get more precise. So advertisers can use their own first-party data and combine it with third-party data to get even more targeted. And that's how things like retargeting and custom audiences have essentially evolved. And it's through the use of first-party and third-party cookie data. Now, Google is proposing to cease supporting third-party cookie data. So guys, keep in mind that a lot of brands have invested a lot of money in working with DMPs, data management platforms, growing this base of third-party data, growing the base of their own first-party data. There has been a lot of work and even just pivoting and reorganization of how companies go to market through advertising, through the use of programmatic. And this is not a small change. It is going to cause a fundamental shift, at least in the advertising side of things, the digital advertising side of things, specifically programmatic, and actually even into some native advertising platforms. And so what is Google proposing? They're not saying they're going to completely disable the kind of personalization that third-party cookies have enabled, but instead they're essentially saying we kind of need to re-engineer how the framework works because there have been abuses. So guys, what is Google proposing as an alternative to third-party cookies? Well, I thought the folks at Digiday did the best job of trying to make the layman understand what it is that Google is proposing as an alternative. And it turns out that the Privacy Sandbox will have 5 application program interfaces, 5 APIs that essentially will replace the way third-party cookies work. And so the advertisers will use each API to receive a set of aggregated data about issues like conversion, how well the ads performed, attribution, etc. And so this is what will replace third-party cookies. The first API is a trust API that is an alternative to CAPTCHA. So you guys know what the CAPTCHA box does, essentially stops bot spamming. And so Google's will have an API that is a replacement to that. And then there's a privacy budget API. So they're introducing this notion of you having sort of a certain number of credits related to privacy. And I think this is where we'll probably see some notion of permissioning and some notion of classification and some notion of giving the user more control around which sites can have access to their sort of profile data. And then the third is Google's conversion measurement API. And this is the one that sounds most like what cookies have really been able to enable for the ad networks. It allows you to see who saw the ad, who clicked on if they clicked on the ad, if they landed on the web page, and if they converted. And so we'll probably see most movement around this particular API, Google's conversion measurement API. And then there is this notion of the federated learning of cohorts. This is an API that apparently relies on machine learning, and so maybe we'll see more sort of predictive analytics. And it says learning to study the browsing habits of groups of similar users, putting them into cohorts. I think more to understand there. And then the final API is a component called Pigin, P-I-G-I-N, referring to private interest groups, including noise. Perhaps this is where audience segmentation and maybe the combination of data sets falls, which lets the Chrome browser track a set of interest groups a user is thought to belong to. So these 5 APIs are essentially what will replace the notion of third-party cookies. So more to learn on these. So what does this mean for you as a brand? I really want to unpack this. So get your pen and paper and take some notes for you to follow up with your CDO, your CIO, CTO, your CMO, your data intelligence folks. Take some notes, because I'm going to go into who I think the winners and losers are going to be, and some things that you can do today to start to prepare for 2022. So guys, I'm going to take you through who I think the winners and the losers, or the folks who will be challenged with this change that Google is proposing making, and how you as a brand can prepare. So the first thing I think is we're going to perhaps see a renaissance of old school email and list building tactics. You know, those tactics have never really gone away, but email has really seen open rates. I recently saw an article from Neil Patel saying that he's part of a group of marketers where they've seen 9% drop in open rates, or I should say click-through rates. So open rates have remained steady, but there's been a 9% drop in click-through rates. And perhaps because first-party data does include this notion of your own email database, and being able to upload that for custom audiences in platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn, Excel, etc. Maybe we will see a renaissance of building your email database. Now, I think absolutely you as a brand should be thinking about, okay, how do I go back to old school, the foundational list building tactics to grow your email list? But I also think you should be expanding your data set with things like cell phone numbers, and extending into SMS and messaging. But essentially, I think there will be a renaissance of email and old school list building. So prepare for that. The second winners, I think, will be data consolidation, hygiene, and cleansing technology. The folks that are, the MarTech folks that are in that space are going to see a surge in demand and need for their services, because everybody's going to need to make sure that their own first-party data is on point. So data hygiene internally is going to become even more important, because we're losing this third-party data set, which has really enhanced our ability to do targeting as an advertiser and as a marketer. And it's going to be very important in order to have this single view of a customer. So those MarTech companies that enable companies to have one data set and a single view of their customers, I think will do well. The other thing is brands with bigger pockets that can acquire ad tech and data tech will win. You know, there have been in the last year some really interesting and not necessarily intuitive acquisitions. Well, now they make a lot more sense to me. So for example, Nike acquiring AI tech like Select. You know, Zodiac, they also acquired, and a design firm like Virgin Mega. Why all the in-house ad tech, martech, data tech purchases? I think it's very much in preparation for expanding their D2C, that direct to consumer motion, but it's also going to be very beneficial because they're going to have increase their database of first party data. And so you're going to see more brands, more bigger advertisers actually acquiring data tech, which is an interesting motion. McDonald's acquisition of Dynamic Yield, right? According to Bloomberg, Dynamic Yield develops a machine learning engine that enables marketers to increase revenue through personalization, recommendations, and automatic optimization across the web, mobile, and email. What does that sound like to you? Right? What is that? That sounds like an offensive measure against some of these changes. It sounds like future proofing to me. And so the brands that can afford to purchase more tech, I think will win. P&G, talks about having amassed 1.5 billion online IDs globally, which it's using to build smart audiences. That is a defensive move. There's an article in which Mark Pritchard, who's the brand officer at P&G, he talks about how they've been acquiring device IDs and PII through their direct-to-consumer motions because they've recently made a lot of acquisition of direct-to-consumer brands. And so not relying through the for sales through the retailers, and instead really doubling down on DTC is enabling these large advertisers to accumulate first-party data. You see how you have to connect the dots there? The other winners, I think, are going to be large publishers with walled gardens, which is another old school phenomenon. So those brands who survived from 2000s through to now and have premium content, but are walled gardens, and some of the new school brands like Facebook, etc., who have this notion of users who are constantly logged in. Facebook, LinkedIn, and then publishers with premium brands that are essentially walled gardens, they're going to see, I think, a real surge in business, and a lot of brands doing direct deals with these publishers, which is kind of like how it used to work back in the day. I'm kind of aging myself. But publishers with logged in users will finally have the last laugh versus programmatic bidding. All right, so new technology like the platforms that allow you to do things like notifications, SMS, messaging. I think mobile in general, this is just a continuation of the dominance and the change in buyer behavior. And mobile is just is not gonna be phased by this to the extent that ad technologies that have relied on third-party cookies are going to be affected. So you're going to see this notion of device IDs become even more important because device IDs are even more unique IDs because they are really owned by one person. People don't tend to share their phones, but they might be sharing a desktop computer. All right, so the browsers will win, of course, right? Particularly Google. But I do think, the power is shifting from web servers to the web browsers because, Google is forming a consortium with the ecosystem and www, and they are trying to standardize, and if their standardization is sort of picked up by the rest of the ecosystem, they certainly will win. So I do want to note, Google tries to make the point that they don't believe that we should just outright block all cookies because it also gives developers who might have sort of hostile intentions, or interlopers, as I like to call them, the ability to find other ways to track you in a way that's called fingerprinting. So apparently there's some developers who find ways to use tiny bits of information that may vary between users, such as like what device they have or what fonts they have installed, that actually allow you to create a unique profile of a particular user. It's quite fascinating, but they're saying that we have to kind of, the ecosystem kind of has to come together to figure out an alternative to third-party cookies, but the answer isn't just banning cookies altogether. It's just getting a bit more sophisticated, and it's because they want to counter this notion of fingerprinting. So another winner that I think has, this is something that we have talked about in the ecosystem for a long time about, and this is this notion of universal IDs. I think people who are a proponent of the need for a universal ID, I think this is going to kind of accelerate the conversations around it. Now, whose universal ID will win in the end? I don't know. There'll likely be a few players. Facebook, Google, Microsoft, they all have this notion of being able to give you a unique ID. Maybe it's going to be the device players. Maybe it's going to be the browser. Maybe it's going to be, folks coming out of the blockchain space, like the Brave browser, or maybe it's going to be new tech that we haven't heard about. But this notion of universal IDs, I think, is going to come to the forefront because of this change. And finally, content will always remain king. So I think the brands and the publishers that have solid premium content, they will be able to kind of keep the ad model that they've traditionally used, and actually maybe even charge a premium for space on their networks. So it's going to be very, very interesting. So who will be challenged with this notion of Google dropping support for third-party cookies? I think the first is obviously the ad networks, ad platforms, ad tech, any technology that has relied on third-party cookies for tracking or for targeting or any sort of additional enhancement to data. I think will be challenged. And I'll be shocked if they are not scrambling or haven't been already preparing or to dive deep into the sandbox to figure out how they can make adjustments and re-engineer the way their technology works. Essentially, they're going to have to figure out, unpack these 5 APIs, and it's going to take a lot of investment, I think, and certainly man hours to figure out how to make this adjustment. There's still a lot of discussion in the ecosystem. The players and the stakeholders in the ecosystem, from the advertisers right through to the publishers, right through the ad tech, have to kind of build some consensus and accept this. So there's still quite a bit of skepticism and cynicism, but I think this is a train that has left the building, and folks will need to adjust. I do want to make a side note. The one thing that may be sort of a black swan and make this whole point is how quickly voice technology and the notion of digital assistants and the usage and adoption of them changes and drive. And if consumers adopt them and that accelerates, there's a whole other part of the team on these platforms that has to be thinking about adapting their entire ad business to count for voice. When people will be actually doing searches and purchases using their voice instead of the browser, this whole conversation might be moot. So, end side note. So the first losers are the ad platforms. They have to adjust. They have to invest. Those who don't have the funding to invest, I think will be challenged, and we might see some consolidation in the space. The second will be, the brands that have low brand equity and no first-party data strategy are gonna be challenged. Those folks who have been relying heavily on just direct response, but they haven't really been investing in building their brand, and they don't necessarily have the bigger budgets. I think that there's gonna be a bit of an adjustment here, and if they don't have a solid first party data strategy, they certainly will be challenged. And so brands need to be, they need to kind of wean their dependency off of programmatic, at least the way traditional programmatic works. That would be my goal. The next set of people who will be challenged are retailers. The folks who, obviously, folks like Nike and the P&G. The folks they are future proofing their businesses. They're moving more into D2C and making that a larger part of their revenue. But retailers in general, gosh, they have really experienced challenges, multiple factors in their whole ecosystem, and this is yet another blow because they have been tended to be heavily reliant on third-party cookies for tracking because some of them are the biggest advertisers out there, and retargeting and programmatic has really enabled them to sort of do digital marketing at scale. And so this is something that they will really have to think about. So if you think about third-party cookies that have enabled cross-domain tracking, and this is how folks can still maintain targeting from publisher to publisher to publisher, from network to network to network, and have the tech, the AI keep on learning on and optimizing your advertising. The removal of support for third-party cookies is really going to affect that. And so retailers, I think, are amongst the group that will be affected. You think about big advertisers like the auto industry, they're going to need to have agencies support them in adjusting. And so I think there's going to be 5 things that you need to do today as a brand to start to prepare for this adjustment. Even if it doesn't happen in the 2-year time frame, I think you need to start doing these things today to just prepare for the evolution in cookie and tracking and tagging and targeting technology. So number 1, if you don't already have one and you're a large enterprise organization, you need to hire a chief data officer. You need to have somebody whose job it is to think about your first party data strategy all day. And they need to be preparing the organization and working with your marketing team, your CMO, your business intelligence person to figure out how to adapt, but really be part of your strategy team in enhancing your first party data. And then the second is you need to build a 2 to 5 year data plan that includes focusing on diversifying your first party data set to include not only traditional email, but device IDs, SMS, messaging, so cell numbers, and have a point of view on universal IDs, who's universal ID, and plug into the industry associations and be part of the conversation and be influencing the approach, depending on where you sit in terms of the size of your company. And you need to bring expertise and in-house and technology that will enable personalization in all of your experiences, on the mobile, on the desktop, etc., in the store. You need to be thinking about, how do I bring the data experts and the experience experts that know how to leverage the data and make it actionable, and you need to have a 2 to 5 year plan. The third thing you need to do is really focus on data consolidation and data hygiene. Internally, you need to have a single database that gives every business unit a single view of that customer. And you need to be bringing in-house the technology that allows you to consolidate that data across your business, but also enable the individual workflows and use cases that are unique to each department. And then number 4, you need to focus on brand. Like, marketers need to have this balance between direct response and branding. It seems to be a theme that I'm continuously thinking about and continuously trying to preach about. If you do not have a strong brand, that you are not future-proofing yourself against all the changes that happen in technology. As a marketer, you need to make sure that as you drive your sort of immediate revenue goals via direct response, that you're still at the same time growing your brand equity and solidifying your brand as a number 1, 2, 3 player, and if you're in a position to do so, the de facto player in your category. Okay, and then number 5, you need to invest in building native content and advertising relationships with premium publishers, podcasters, app developers, and influencers in your industry and sector. I think we're going to go back to how things used to work 20 years ago. I remember when I, as a marketer, would have a core set of publishers that I worked with that were specific to the audience I was targeting, that had premium content. I think for a period, unless there's some black swan event that sort of changes the technology paradigm, that we may see a shift for the bigger players. Now, this is going to affect, SMB and mid-market. But what also happens is we tend to see a ton of innovation when things like this happen. So I do think we are going to see a lot of innovation in the ad tech and martech space with respect to targeting and advertising. And usually the SMB and mid-market, it comes out of trying to service them, because while the big brands can adjust, the SMB market tends to be affected. The question is, how is this going to affect, AdWords, right? Is Google going to sort of restrict their own advertisers to the same constraints? Remains to be seen. But it does certainly appear that this is one of those inflections in the evolution of the internet and ad tech that will sort of affect standardization across the board. And as a marketer, I am really, really excited, because there were and have been some negatives to everything sort of surrounding how third-party cookies work, but there also have been some tremendous improvements in performance with the use of third-party cookies. So I am excited as a marketer to just see how our space evolves, and as a practitioner, I'm excited to sort of test and learn and see what new innovations come out of these changes. So keep your eye out for more information from Google on how this privacy sandbox is going to work and what developers have to do, and have those conversations internally with your data teams to figure out how you can prepare to win. If you liked this content, please make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn the notification button on if you are watching me on YouTube, and please connect with me on social media, on any of your favorite social media channels. And I would love to hear from you, so comment, DM me, and just let me know what you think of this content, or what you think of this phenomenon that is happening. If there's anything I've missed or anything that needs to be corrected, hit me up or tag me in the comments. Have a great day. What you waiting for?